The long wait by the oak tree. The ancient oak, its branches a twisted calligraphy against the sky, offered scant solace on the sun-baked road. Evan leaned into its rough embrace, the afternoon's warmth a superficial comfort against the icy thrill of anticipation in his veins. His heart, a frantic captive in his chest, drummed a relentless prelude to the moment. He'd kept vigil since dawn, his ostensible task helping Mrs. Gable with her pansies, but every nerve ending truly thrummed with a singular, desperate focus. Tyler. Months had trickled by since the last communique, a terse official notice of discharge, then an abyss of silence, a vacuum relentlessly filled by Evan's fervent imaginings. He pictured Tyler descending from the train, perhaps leaner, certainly aged, yet fundamentally the man he held in memory. The quiet fortitude, the unwavering gaze, the subtle upturn of his lips when Evan managed a genuine jest. Evan wondered if the war had etched new constellations of worry around those eyes, if the rare spark of laughter had been utterly extinguished. A faint dust plume materialized on the horizon, swelling steadily. Evan stiffened, his breath catching. A wagon, an unexpected conveyance from the station, but then nothing about this return felt ordinary. As it drew nearer, the figure beside the driver resolved into sharp focus. Tall, unmistakable. Tyler, he alighted with a fluid economy of motion, a testament to an underlying power that defied months of conflict. His uniform, though clean, draped differently, emphasizing a tauter, more hardened frame. He looked up and Evan's sight snagged on his. Tyler's eyes, once a direct, clear blue, now held an unsettling depth, a distant quality that sent a shiver through Evan. They seemed to pierce through him, or perhaps beyond him, fixed on some invisible horizon Evan couldn't perceive. The small, welcoming party from town, mostly women and a scattering of older men, began to murmur and stir. Mrs. Gable, her usually ebullient face softened by concern, stepped forward, a basket of freshly baked bread clutched in her hand. "Tyler, dear boy, it's so good to have you home," she offered, her voice a balm. Tyler acknowledged her with a near imperceptible tilt of his head, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. He offered no words, no smile. He didn't even seem to truly register Mrs. Gable, or the other townsfolk now hesitantly approaching. His gaze swept over them all, pausing for a fleeting instant on Evan. A swift, almost invisible nod, a silent recognition in a sea of unspoken greetings. It was everything, and yet nothing. The gathering at the town hall that evening was intended as a celebration. Banners proclaimed, "Welcome home, Tyler," and a harvest of home-cooked dishes covered long tables. Laughter and chatter pulsed through the air, yet around Tyler a curious vacuum seemed to form. He sat at the head table, his plate untouched, absorbing the well-meaning inquiries and observations about the war. His replies were clipped, devoid of warmth, purely factual. He recounted logistics, troop movements, never straying into the realm of emotion, no mention of the fear, the fellowship, or the horrors Evan knew must have scoured his soul. Evan observed him from across the room, a leaden knot tightening in his stomach. Tyler was present in body, yet absent in spirit. His eyes, though ostensibly fixed on the speaker, held that same faraway look, as if his consciousness still patrolled a distant battlefield, replaying scenes no one else could fathom. He was a sentinel, carved from the granite of war, impossibly strong, impossibly remote. Mrs. Gable met Evan's gaze, a shared sadness in her own. She raised a hand, beckoning him closer. "He's changed, hasn't he?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The war claims a piece of them, Evan. Sometimes it's a piece they never retrieve." She paused, her eyes resting on Tyler's unmoving profile. "But sometimes it just buries it deep, and it takes a very patient hand to help them unearth it." Her words, quiet as they were, settled in Evan's heart. A heavy weight of understanding mingled with a nascent flicker of unwavering resolve. The long vigil by the oak tree had concluded, but a new, more profound wait had just begun. A quiet presence. The days bled into weeks, each one mirroring the last in its quiet, persistent rhythm. Tyler had retreated into the cavernous space of the garage, a sanctuary of forgotten tools and the ghosts of old projects. The metallic clang of a wrench, the rasp of sandpaper, the occasional groan of an engine being coaxed back to life. These were the only sounds that broke the heavy silence around his solitude. He worked with a fierce, almost desperate energy, his back to the world, his hands perpetually grimed with grease and oil. Evan would sometimes catch a glimpse of him through the grimy window, a silhouette hunched over a workbench, illuminated by the bare bulb overhead. Tyler never spoke of where he'd been, never offered an explanation for the haunted look in his eyes or the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. Evan, understanding the unspoken need for space, had settled into a different kind of vigil. He watched, he waited, and he began a gentle, unspoken routine. In the late afternoons, the scent of warm apple pie would drift from Evan's kitchen, a comforting domestic anchor in the unsettled air. He'd bake it himself, the crust golden and flaky, the filling spiced just so. With a glass pitcher of iced lemonade, condensation beading on its surface, he'd carry his offering out to the porch. Tyler would be deep in his work, oblivious or perhaps simply pretending to be. Evan would leave the pie and lemonade on the sturdy wooden table just inside the garage door, then settle onto the porch swing. The swing creaked softly with his weight, a steady, rhythmic sigh. From there, Evan could observe. He'd watch Tyler's hands, strong and calloused, moving with unpracticed precision. He'd noticed the way Tyler's jaw was perpetually clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. There was a tautness to his movements, a restless energy, even in stillness. Tyler rarely looked up, his gaze fixed on the intricate mechanics before him, as if the answers to all his unasked questions lay hidden within the gears and wires. Evan never pressed him, never intruded with questions or even casual conversation. He simply existed, a quiet presence, a silent anchor in Tyler's storm. He'd sip his own lemonade, feeling the tart sweetness on his tongue, and listen to the symphony of the garage, the methodical tap of a hammer, the whir of a power tool, the occasional grunt of exertion. The sun would begin its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the yard. Evan would remain, a patient sentinel, his heart aching with a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed until Tyler's return. He saw the changes in Tyler, not just the lines etched deeper around his eyes, but a fundamental shift in his spirit, a hardening that had taken root in the core of him. Evan sensed the internal struggles raging beneath Tyler's stoic exterior. He imagined the battles Tyler was still fighting, the ones that left no visible scars but tore at a man's soul. Sometimes, as dusk settled, Tyler would emerge from the garage, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, and find Evan on the swing. He wouldn't speak, but his eyes, when they met Evan's, held a flicker of something unreadable. Exhaustion, perhaps, or a nascent vulnerability. He'd grab a slice of pie, sometimes two, and a glass of lemonade, and retreat back into the garage, leaving Evan alone once more, yet not truly alone. There was a fragile bridge being built, not with words, but with warm pies and quiet companionship, a silent promise to wait, to understand, to be there. The rising tension wasn't in any overt conflict, but in the unspoken chasm between them. Evan's unwavering presence was a stark contrast to Tyler's self-imposed isolation. It was a silent battle of wills, Evan's gentle persistence against Tyler's rigid retreat. Every day, Evan's hope grew a little stronger, nurtured by the simple fact that Tyler hadn't pushed him away completely. He accepted the food, acknowledged Evan's presence in his own tacit way. It was a start, a fragile thread in the tapestry of their lives, and Evan held onto it with fierce determination. He would be the quiet presence, the steady light, until Tyler was ready to find his way back. The thunder's echo. The oppressive humidity of the summer evening pressed in, a thick blanket that promised a storm. Evan sat on a stool in the corner of the garage, the faint scent of oil and metal a familiar comfort. He watched Tyler work, the rhythmic clink of tools against unseen machinery, the only sound for a long time. Tyler was a silhouette against the single bare bulb hanging overhead, his broad shoulders hunched over an engine block, movements precise and deliberate. Even in the quiet solitude of the garage, a restless energy radiated from him, a tension that Evan had come to recognize as a constant companion to Tyler since his return. Evan hadn't pushed for conversation, not yet. Tyler was a man of few words, and Evan had learned that presence, a quiet vigil, was often more effective than any spoken sentiment. He'd brought Tyler a glass of iced tea earlier, leaving it on the workbench without a word, watching Tyler's calloused hand close around it moments later, a silent acknowledgement. A low rumble began to build in the distance, a deep vibration that made the glass panes in the garage door shiver. Tyler didn't react, his focus unwavering as he tightened a bolt. Then with a sudden, ear-splitting crack, the sky ripped open. A bolt of lightning ignited the world outside the grimy window for a split second, followed immediately by a thunderclap that seemed to shake the very foundations of the garage. The wrench slipped from Tyler's grasp, clattering loudly against the concrete floor. He flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement that pulled his shoulders up to his ears. Evan saw it, a flicker of something raw and exposed in Tyler's eyes. A profound fear that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar guarded expression. But not before Evan had seen it. Tyler remained frozen for a beat, his hands suspended in mid-air above the engine. He didn't turn around. The air in the garage felt heavy, charged not just with the aftermath of the storm's outburst, but with an unspoken weight that had settled between them. "You okay?" Evan's voice was soft, barely a whisper against the receding echoes of the thunder. He didn't move from his stool, giving Tyler the space he clearly needed. Tyler didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the drumming of rain against the corrugated metal roof. Evan watched his back, the tense line of his spine, the way his knuckles, even from this distance, looked white. After what felt like an eternity, Tyler slowly lowered his hands, picking up the dropped wrench with a deliberate slowness. He turned then, his eyes meeting Evan's for a fleeting moment before drifting to the darkened window. "Loud!" Tyler murmured, his voice a low rasp, almost lost beneath the rain. Evan waited. He knew Tyler wasn't just talking about the thunder. Tyler let out a slow breath, a shaky sound that Evan barely caught. "Heard a loud noise once," he continued, his gaze still fixed on the rain-streaked glass. "Far away. Bad memory." It wasn't much, a vague fragment, but it was more than Tyler had ever shared about the invisible wounds he carried. Evan's heart gave a little lurch. He saw the tremor in Tyler's hand as he gripped the wrench, the slight tightness around his eyes. This wasn't just a soldier's stoicism. It was a man grappling with something immense and terrifying, just beneath the surface. A wave of protectiveness washed over Evan, stronger and more profound than anything he'd felt before. He understood, in that moment, that the quiet strength Tyler projected was a shield, and that behind it lay a vulnerability that was heartbreakingly human. The connection, already fragile and tentative, solidified. Evan knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within him, that he was witnessing a depth of pain he had only suspected. He wanted nothing more than to reach across the space separating them, to offer comfort, to simply be there. The thunder's echo had revealed more than just a passing fear. It had opened a small, crucial window into Tyler's haunted world. Small openings. The rhythmic clink of Evan's wrench against the engine block was the only sound for a long time, punctuated by the distant cry of a gull. Tyler, leaning against the workbench, watched him with an intensity that made Evan's skin prickle. He wasn't judging exactly, more like observing, cataloguing. Evan felt a familiar warmth unfurl in his chest, a quiet protectiveness. He knew instinctively that Tyler's quietude wasn't peace, but a tightly wound coil. "It's funny," Tyler said, his voice a low rumble, startling Evan slightly. He hadn't expected him to speak. "Sometimes I miss the ocean. Not the actual ocean, not really. Just the sound of it, you know, that constant, endless murmur." Evan paused, the wrench still in his hand. "I do. There's a particular calm in it." Tyler nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the grimy window. "Yeah. And the smell of rain? Real rain. Not just a shower, but a proper downpour that cleans everything." He paused again, a faint tremor running through him that Evan almost missed. It was a fleeting thing, like a ripple on the still water. These small observations, Evan realized, were like tiny cracks appearing in a formidable wall. They were precious, each one a fragile offering, a glimpse into the guarded landscape of Tyler's inner world. Evan understood the significance. Tyler didn't talk about himself, not ever. These were echoes of a past, perhaps, or yearnings for a future, shared with a hesitant trust that made Evan's heart ache in a tender way. Later, over mugs of lukewarm tea, Evan noticed it again. Tyler was recounting some mundane detail about a chipped ceramic plate, his hands gesturing subtly, and then for a split second, they trembled. Just a flicker. But it was there, a barely perceptible quake in his fingers as he held his mug. Evan pretended not to see, keeping his expression neutral, his own hand steady as he stirred his tea. He wouldn't acknowledge it, wouldn't draw attention to it. It was a secret, a vulnerability that Tyler hadn't explicitly shared, but had unknowingly revealed. Evan would keep it safe. A sudden, sharp clap of thunder rattled the old house, making the windows vibrate. Tyler flinched, a rapid, involuntary movement, his shoulders hunching almost imperceptibly before he straightened, his jaw tightening. His eyes, usually so impassive, held a flicker of something Evan recognized as fear, raw and unguarded, quickly suppressed. "Sounds like a storm brewing," Evan said, his voice deliberately calm, not wanting to draw attention to Tyler's reaction. He reached across the small table, placing a hand lightly on Tyler's arm, a gesture of quiet reassurance. Tyler didn't pull away immediately. He let Evan's touch linger, his gaze still fixed on the window where the sky was darkening rapidly. I remember a storm once," he said, his voice barely a whisper, strained. "Out in the desert, it was different. Not like this. More chaotic." He trailed off, his eyes clouding over, lost in a memory Evan couldn't fathom, but which clearly held a deep, lingering pain. The atmosphere in the small kitchen thickened, charged with the unsaid, with the ghost of a past Evan was only beginning to understand. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of Tyler's unspoken experience, and the growing, undeniable connection between them. There's the unopened letter. The scent of stale coffee and morning dew usually greeted Evan as he retrieved the mail, a mundane ritual that typically yielded nothing more exciting than bills or flyers. Today, however, a thick, cream-coloured envelope stood out, addressed in elegant cursive to Tyler. He carried it inside, placing it on the kitchen counter where Tyler often left his keys. Later that afternoon, Evan found the letter. It lay crumpled in a tight ball beside the sink, unread. Tyler was nowhere in sight, but the evidence of his presence lingered. A half-empty mug, a lingering whisper of his cologne. Evan smoothed out the crumpled paper as best he could, noticing the precise, almost calligraphic handwriting. A pit formed in his stomach. Tyler never crumpled anything. His world was one of order and meticulous precision. This was a violation. Concern gnawed at him throughout the day. He tried to brush it off, attributing it to a bad mood, but the image of the discarded letter kept returning. Tyler was a man forged from steel, unyielding and impenetrable, or so Evan had always believed. Yet the crumpled paper hinted at a fragility he'd never witnessed. Dusk bled into night, painting the living room in shades of bruised purple and grey. Evan found Tyler then, not in his usual armchair with a book, but huddled on the floor by the cold hearth, his knees drawn up to his chest. The room was dark, save for the faint glow from the streetlights filtering through the window. Evan's heart seized. Tyler's broad shoulders, usually ramrod straight, were slumped, and the rhythmic sound of soft, choked sobs filled the silence. Evan had seen Tyler angry, frustrated, even mildly amused, but never like this, never broken. Tears streamed down Tyler's face, catching the sliver of light from the window, turning them into shimmering trails. It was a sight that ripped through Evan's carefully constructed image of his friend, exposing a raw, aching vulnerability he hadn't known existed. A primal surge of protectiveness coursed through Evan. He knelt beside Tyler, his hand hovering uncertainly before settling gently on his shoulder. Tyler flinched, a sharp, involuntary tremor, then slowly leaned into the touch, his body trembling. "Tyler?" Evan's voice was a whisper, laced with a tenderness he rarely allowed himself to show. Tyler didn't respond immediately, his breath catching in ragged gasps. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick, raspy, as if it had been torn from him. It's the smell. I can almost taste it again. The dust, the burning, the metallic tang of fear. His words trailed off, punctuated by a shudder that rippled through his entire frame. Evan tightened his grip, pulling Tyler closer until the soldier's head rested on his shoulder. He could feel the wetness of Tyler's tears through his shirt, a tangible testament to the depth of his pain. "What is it, Ty? What happened?" Tyler shook his head, burying his face deeper into Evan's shoulder. "It's not what happened. It's what could happen again. That letter, it brought it all back. The feeling of being trapped, the noise, the sheer crushing weight of everything." His body tensed, and Evan felt the subtle shift as Tyler's muscles bunched beneath his touch. A silent battle against an unseen enemy. Evan held him, offering no platitudes, just the steady comfort of his presence. He understood, then, that this wasn't just about a letter. It was about a wound that had never truly healed, a silent scream that had finally found its voice. In that moment, Tyler, the unyielding soldier, was simply Tyler, a man deeply afraid. And Evan, for the first time, felt the full, overwhelming weight of loving him. A confused heart. The lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across Tyler's face, highlighting the tremor in his jaw. He was a man carved from granite, yet now he seemed to be crumbling before Evan's very eyes. The crumpled letter, still clutched in his white-knuckled fist, was a silent testament to the storm raging within him. I don't understand any of this." Tyler's voice, usually a steady rumble, was now a fragile, broken thing, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He swallowed hard, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape route, but always returning to Evan. "Why do I feel so lost? So confused?" He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, a muscle twitching near his temple. "Especially when you're here." Evan's heart hammered against his ribs. The raw vulnerability Tyler was exhibiting was a stark contrast to the composed, unyielding soldier he knew. It was disorienting, and yet it pulled Evan in, an irresistible force. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but something held him back, a fear of shattering the fragile trust Tyler was offering. "It's like my head is screaming one thing, and my gut is just a tangled mess of another." Tyler continued, his voice barely above a whisper, laced with a pain that was palpable. He raked a hand through his hair, dislodging a few strands that fell across his forehead. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I want, it's all just gone, blown to pieces." Evan watched him, mesmerized by the unfolding intimacy of the moment. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotions. He could feel the weight of Tyler's confusion, the genuine distress that racked him. It was more than just the letter. It was a deeper upheaval, a seismic shift in Tyler's carefully constructed world. Suddenly, Tyler pushed himself away from the edge of the sofa, a frantic energy seizing him. He stumbled back a step, his chest heaving. "You shouldn't be here," he blurted out, his eyes wide and haunted. I'm not good company. I need to be alone." The words were sharp, an attempt to create the distance, a desperate effort to rebuild the walls he'd unwittingly let crumble. Evan felt a pang, a sharp twist in his gut. He knew Tyler wasn't trying to hurt him, but the rejection still stung. He saw the panic in Tyler's eyes, the way his hands trembled, and understood it was a defense mechanism, a reflexive retreat. But after witnessing such profound vulnerability, Evan couldn't just walk away. "Tyler, no," Evan said, his voice firm but gentle, taking a step closer. "Don't do that. Don't push me away." Tyler flinched, as if Evan's words were physical blows. He shook his head, a wildness in his gaze. "You don't understand," he insisted, his voice cracking again. This is a mess, a total disaster. You don't want to be caught in it." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the crumpled letter, at the chaos swirling around them. His attempt to push Evan away felt like a desperate plea for protection, for Evan to escape the wreckage Tyler felt he had become. Evan held his ground, his gaze unwavering. He saw past the desperate words, past the attempts to create distance. He saw the genuine agony, the fear in Tyler's eyes. And in that moment, something solidified within Evan. His concern deepened into something more profound, a protective instinct he hadn't fully recognized until now. He wouldn't let Tyler face this alone. Unwavering presence. Evan watched as Tyler retreated further into himself, a silent, powerful storm brewing behind his usually stoic eyes. He tried to push Evan away, a desperate, almost frantic effort to regain control, to reassert the emotional distance he usually maintained, but Evan wouldn't budge. He settled onto the floor beside Tyler's armchair, close enough that their knees almost brushed, yet far enough to grant him space. He didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply existed, a quiet, unwavering presence in the charged silence of the room. Tyler's breaths were ragged, each exhale a shuddering release of the turmoil he was battling. His hands, which usually moved with such purpose, were clenched into fists, resting on his thighs. He stared straight ahead, at nothing in particular, his jaw tight. Evan could feel the raw edges of his distress, a tangible weight in the air between them. He resisted the urge to reach out, to offer a comforting touch. He knew Tyler, knew that right now, even the gentlest touch might feel like an intrusion, a further erosion of his crumbling composure. So he waited, a steadfast anchor in Tyler's tempest. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were Tyler's uneven breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Evan focused on a loose thread on the rug, on the way the late afternoon light slanted through the window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. He catalogued these small details, anything to keep his own rising anxiety at bay. He was here for Tyler, and nothing would make him leave. Not the uncomfortable silence, not the palpable tension, not even Tyler's unspoken plea for him to disappear. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid lines of Tyler's posture began to soften. His shoulders, which had been hunched, eased back. The fists unclenched, his fingers splaying slightly. The intensity in his gaze lessened, replaced by a profound weariness. Evan watched these subtle shifts, a silent observer to Tyler's internal surrender. The fight, for now, seemed to be draining out of him. Then, with a soft sigh that seemed to carry the weight of untold burdens, Tyler shifted. He leaned his head back against the armchair, his eyes finally closing, and then, as if drawn by an invisible force, he tilted his head, letting it rest gently against Evan's shoulder. It wasn't a deliberate movement, not a conscious embrace, but a simple, exhausted surrender. The warmth of his temple against Evan's skin sent a jolt through him, a powerful, protective instinct blossoming in his chest. Evan remained still for a moment, letting Tyler settle. He felt the soft brush of Tyler's hair against his cheek, the steady, if still slightly uneven, rhythm of his breathing. The contact, so simple yet so profound, deepened the unspoken understanding between them. It was a bridge built not of words, but of shared vulnerability and unwavering support. Carefully, Evan raised his arm, letting it rest lightly around Tyler's back, his fingers coming to rest just above his hip. He didn't pull him closer, didn't squeeze. It was a gesture of quiet reassurance, a silent promise of presence. Tyler didn't stir, didn't protest. He simply leaned into the touch, a heavy, trusting weight. The room was still, the air thick with emotions that had no need for language. In that shared silence, a new intimacy bloomed, fragile yet fiercely resilient. The unbreakable thread. The scent of pine tar and freshly turned earth clung to Tyler's clothes, a constant reminder of the day's work and the distance he tried to put between himself and Evan's porch. He'd spent the last few days burying himself in tasks at his family's hardware store, hauling lumber, sorting nails, anything to keep his mind from drifting back to the quiet understanding in Evan's eyes. He ate his meals at odd hours, hoping to avoid any casual encounters. He even walked the long way home, past the old mill, just to steer clear of the familiar path that led directly past Evan's. But the pull was undeniable, a subtle current in the air that hummed with Evan's presence. Each evening, as dusk bled across the sky, Tyler found his footsteps faltering, his resolve eroding. His boots, heavy with the day's dust, seemed to guide him, independent of his conscious will, down the lane that curved gently toward Evan's small cottage. He never intended to stop, merely to walk past, to perhaps catch a glimpse, a fleeting confirmation that the gentle soul still existed outside his troubled thoughts. Yet he always found himself there, perched on the edge of the weathered porch, a silent sentinel. Evan, without fail, would be waiting. Sometimes he'd be whittling a small bird from a block of wood, the delicate curls of timber falling into his lap. Other times he'd be tending to the potted herbs, his fingers brushing over basil and thyme with a tenderness that made something ache in Tyler's chest. He never pushed, never questioned, never demanded. He simply offered a quiet nod, a faint smile, and a steaming mug of something warm. Tea usually, or sometimes a spiced cider that settled the frantic knots in Tyler's stomach. In those hushed moments under the fading light, Tyler felt a peculiar kind of safety he hadn't known since before the war. It wasn't the fleeting calm of a medic's touch or the camaraderie of fellow soldiers. It was deeper, more fundamental. Evan saw him, truly saw the fractured parts beneath the hardened shell, and didn't recoil. He just was. And in his unwavering presence, Tyler found himself breathing easier, the constant clatter of his own thoughts quieting to a murmur. One afternoon, as Tyler was wrestling a stubbornly jammed wagon wheel in front of the hardware store, Mrs. Gable, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, paused her brisk walk. She watched him for a moment, her gaze shrewd and knowing. "Heard you've been spending a good deal of time on Evan's porch lately, Tyler," she said, her voice a soft rumble. Tyler grunted, wiping a smear of grease from his brow. "Just passing through." Mrs. Gable chuckled, a warm, resonant sound. "Funny how some paths just lead you where you need to be. Evan's a good man. Always has been. The war changes a person, Tyler. It puts a wall around them. But some walls need a gentle hand to find the cracks." She offered a small, knowing smile, then continued on her way, leaving Tyler to ponder her words amidst the clang of metal. He hated the thought of being seen as broken, as someone needing repair. But with Evan, the need felt less like a weakness and more like a simple fact. He was drawn, inextricably, to the quiet solace Evan offered, a silent promise of understanding that didn't demand explanations or justifications. It was a thread, invisible but unbreakable, pulling him closer, even when every instinct told him to run. And as the days turned into a week, then another, Tyler began to realize that the safety he felt wasn't just a reprieve from the war, but a profound connection to the man who offered it so freely. He was falling, slowly, irrevocably, and the sensation, terrifying as it was, felt like coming home. A new dawn. The afternoon sun, often a stark mirror of his own internal desolation, held a different quality today. It streamed into Miller's hardware, setting dust motes alight as they danced, tiny golden specks in the air. Tyler, polishing a display of newly sharpened garden tools, shifted his gaze to the street. As anticipated, Evan was there, perched on the porch railing, an open book resting in his lap. He wasn't reading, though. His eyes were fixed on the distant hills, lost in a familiar... Since his return, when the world felt overwhelmingly loud and fast, Evan had been his steady North Star, a silent anchor amidst a storm of memories. He never pressed for answers Tyler couldn't give, never pushed when Tyler retreated. He simply was. Tyler found himself anticipating these afternoons, a gentle expectation that had, almost imperceptibly, begun to erode the formidable wall he'd constructed around himself. Today, as Evan stirred and caught his eye, something within Tyler also shifted. Evan offered a small, tentative smile, a question lingering in his soft, blue gaze. A warmth, unbidden and unfamiliar, spread through Tyler's chest. It wasn't the searing heat of anger or the cold grip of fear. It was tender. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, a genuine smile touched Tyler's lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Evan's own smile broadened, a slow, dawning realization blooming across his face. It was a shared moment, a silent acknowledgement of a profound connection. The air in the hardware store, usually scented with sawdust and metal, suddenly buzzed with a different energy, lighter, imbued with nascent hope. Tyler's hand, still clutching the cleaning rag, trembled. He lowered it slowly, his gaze still locked with Evan's. The realization struck him with the force of a tidal wave, yet with the quiet certainty of a sunrise. He loved Evan, more than the solace Evan offered, more than the comfort of his presence, more than the simple relief of not being alone. He loved Evan for the quiet strength in his eyes, for his unwavering patience, for the gentle understanding that transcended words. He loved him with a depth that both frightened and exhilarated him. The warmth intensified, coursing through his limbs, settling deep into his bones. It was a feeling of homecoming, of discovering a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing until it was found. The scars on his soul, though still present, seemed to hum with a different resonance, less painful, more like echoes of a distant past. Evan, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the tremor in Tyler's carefully constructed composure. He didn't move, didn't speak, merely held Tyler's gaze, a silent promise in his eyes. It was a promise of acceptance, of unwavering support, of a future Tyler hadn't dared to dream of. The soft chime of the bell above the door announced a customer, breaking the spell. Tyler blinked, the reality of his surroundings slowly seeping back in. He cleared his throat, but the smile lingered, a soft, unfamiliar curve on his lips. He turned to the customer, offering a polite greeting, his thoughts still tethered to Evan, to the warmth that still bloomed in his chest. Evan, for his part, had returned to his book, though Tyler noticed his thumb absently tracing the spine. When Tyler looked out again, Evan met his gaze with a knowing glint. The afternoon sun, once a harbinger of gloom, now felt like a spotlight, illuminating a clear path forward. The world outside, once a chaotic blur, seemed to settle into a sharper, more vibrant focus. A new dawn, indeed,